Hello citizens of the Dark Knight Nation, and welcome back to the channel. Today I have a really special video for you, a discussion that I had with comic book writer, screenwriter, director Pornsak Pichetshote regarding all things his upcoming Image comic book series, The Good Asian, his installment in the DC Festival of Heroes, and then some. I'm really excited for you guys to give this a listen because Pornsak is a really intuitive, thoughtful creator that I think deserves a lot more attention, and this conversation again revolves around, for the most part, his upcoming Image comic book series, The Good Asian, which has its premiere issue May 5th, coming out in stores near you, and we're also going to have an opportunity for you to be able to win a free copy of this book for yourself. In order to do so, I'm going to need you to like this video if you end up enjoying it, subscribe to the channel, and we want you to tag both of us on Twitter letting us know what your favorite crime story of all time is. It could be a comic, it could be film, television, so on and so forth. And I'll have our Twitter tags scrolling across the screen now, as well as in the description below. And with that, you'll also win a free copy of my comic book, Area 51, The Helix Project. So keep that in mind. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this discussion and the sort of narrative approach that Pornsak took to The Good Asian in particular, and how he sort of takes that into a grander number of his stories. If you haven't already, consider giving The Good Asian a look. It's an awesome comic. I've had the opportunity to read the first 3 issues, and you guys know I'm a very no bullshit type of guy. It is excellent. Not only does it re-employ the sort of classical tropes of the crime genre, but it does so in a much more contemporary sense, and Pornsak refits those tools of the genre and of the trade in order to create a brand new sort of style of storytelling that is entirely his own, that he has coined the Chinatown Noir. So I really think you're going to enjoy it. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation, and I look forward to hearing you guys let us know what your favorite crime story is on Twitter. With all that out of the way, thanks for watching, and we'll roll the clip. Pornsak, I am really excited to talk a little bit about The Good Asian, about your career in the field. But first and foremost, how are you, man?
I'm doing all right. You know, things seem to be good in America right now. You know, we can leave the house, and they say we can even do it without masks. You know, if you're vaccinated, that's kind of amazing. I took my mom out for a walk for the first time in sort of like a year yesterday. So like, you know, I mean, at the same time though, my sister's in Thailand and she has to deal with the facts of the vaccines that are bad. So like, you know, there's some good in the take. But thank you for asking, and things are going well right now.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear.
And it's great to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I found myself over the last couple of years increasingly interested in speaking with voices of independent comics in particular, just because of the level of authorship that they are bringing and more capable of bringing when they're dealing with a project that is theirs. And that's very indicative of what we see in The Good Asian, which the first issue drops next week. You must be absolutely elated.
Yeah, I am. You know, I'm elated. I'm excited. I'm on pins and needles to see what people think. But it's great to just have it out there in the world. And yeah, you know, I totally 100% agree with you. And it's one of the things that just blows me away, sort of like about Image, about just how much my publisher Image Comics, that just how well they're set up to champion voices and champion personal visions. It's funny, I was typing this post on Instagram like right before this, where I did not, when the book was solicited, my local comic book shop said like, oh my God, you're in the front of the catalog. And I'm like, I know, isn't it cool that Image is like one of those publishers that gets to be in the front of the catalog? But I didn't actually check my copies of previews until like very recently. And I didn't realize it's like the very first listing on like, it's like you open the book and you see the ad for the book. And you know, and it's a book at the end of the day, it's a crime noir book, but at the end of the day, it's a book about history, and it's a book about Asian American history. There's nothing really else like it. There's nothing that really tackles that subject matter, and it's because it's a risk at the end of the day. And so for my publisher to take that risk so boldly at every step of the way, and this was like, and they made this commitment before hashtags, before any kind of national outcry, and sort of like what's happening with the Asian American community right now is such a testament to sort of not just like how committed they are as a company and as individuals, but how well their company as a publisher is set up to champion voices and visions.
Yes. Yeah. One of the I've really I mean, Image has slowly amounted to becoming my favorite contemporary
Mhm.
comic book publisher,
Yeah.
and a large part of it is because I think they carry the flame for classic Vertigo in a
Yeah.
way, and continue to expand upon that.
Yeah.
And I know you obviously have a lot of love for Vertigo because
Yeah.
your career in comics started as an
Yeah.
editor for someone. Man, I can't give Karen Berger enough love, but
Yeah.
I can't shut up about Karen Berger on my.
Yeah. She's awesome. She's awesome.
Does modern Image, contemporary Image, I should say,
Mhm.
does this feel like the place that Image or that Vertigo would have? Is this the modern day? Is this I keep saying modern, but you know what I'm saying?
It's hard to say because I don't think a place like Vertigo completely exists right now.
Yeah.
Even though there are a lot of people who are trying to make sort of new versions of Vertigo, I think Image holds the flame of having sort of the most, the highest quality of books and creators from creators sort of like carrying the Vertigo flame, you
Mhm.
know? But in terms of like what Vertigo actually did, you know, I think the thing that, and you mention it, but in a weird way, I don't think it's talked about enough about, and this is self-serving on my part, but part of what made Vertigo was its editorial staff, and it was an editorial staff that knew how to groom, talent, and
Mhm.
knew how to see the best parts of talent and sort of help them do their best work. And it's one
Mhm.
of the reasons why you would see certain writers do these amazing Vertigo books, and they would go on to do other books, and you'll be like, oh, I guess they're not a superhero writer. And the fact is, it wasn't that they weren't a superhero writer. It was that just there was a different level of editorial guidance and editorial, the nurtureship that they were getting from their editors there. And and I think you're seeing, and so Image is definitely the place where a lot of those people who had that fire, kind of came from and gravitated to. And so it is sort of, I think, inherited the torch in that aspect. But it's not exactly like Vertigo in the sense that, like, at Vertigo, at Image, you bring on your own editors. They don't sort of assign editors to you, and as a result, then it is sort of up to the creator how much of a process they want their editor to have. Will Dennis, who's my editor, who's one of the great Vertigo editors, I know what he brings to a project when you give him the freedom to bring to a project, and that's why I try to give him as much of that freedom as possible when I'm working with him. And when we're working on The Good Asian, but I know other creators with other editors might not be that way. So I think yes and no, and I think a lot of people, are trying to sort of like build things in the Vertigo model. Like, Boom's done a great job with their books lately. Eric Harburn is a fantastic editor who seems to be coming out with hit after hit, not just from, he'll put out a book with Grant Morrison, with Proctor Valley Road, but like he's also the editor who's also one of the first editors that worked with Ollie Masters and did a great book like Snowblind. So he has like one of those talents that can do that, so and I think I think it's going to be a matter of whose stewardship can kind of lead an entire publishing imprint and impart that to sort of all their assistant editors and line editors as well.
Yeah, the editor, I think, amongst many folks in the industry, are an unsung hero for sure, and this incredibly blind yet powerful force in the creative process, or people are blind to them, I should say. There's, you look at speculators from the fandom online, and it's always, the downfall of this book is the editor's fault.
Right.
They're man, I know there's a phrase that's just not in my morning brain right now about the unsung hero and so on and so forth, but it's pretty incredible, and it's always nice to hear positivity about the editor and the editor's role in the book, and specifically speaking, The Good Asian, which I'm really excited to talk about, and I'm also highly anxious because now that I've read the first 3 issues, I have to wait for issue 4.
yeah, I know that is always a challenge of preview copies. It's true.
Yeah, it's torturous, but I'll survive. And so before we kind of get on into it a little bit more, you gave a little bit of the contextual background of The Good Asian, but I'm hoping you can give the viewers a little bit more of an understanding of where you're coming from and what the approach is if they haven't heard of it already.
Sure, sure. So the Good Asians, a genre we're calling Chinatown Noir. It's a 1936 detective mystery featuring the first generation of Americans who came of age underneath an immigration ban, the Chinese. And so it is a, gumshoe noir, that classic sense of a detective coming to a town looking for a girl, finds sort of a bigger mystery. But what it really wants to talk about is sort of, or hang a spotlight on, is this larger Asian American history that we've kind of forgotten about. We haven't been talked about. Chief amongst with is the Chinese Exclusion Act and the Immigration Act of 1924. The Chinese Exclusion Act banned Chinese from entering the country, from 1884 to 1943, and the Immigration Act of 1924 banned all Asians and Arabs from coming into the country. So the time where the book takes place, 1936, is a time where Asian immigrants weren't allowed into America. And it kind of riffs off of when I was younger. I loved or was curious to watch, to watch in the 1930s, there was this popularity of Asian crime solvers, Charlie Chan, Mr. Moto, Mr. Wong. And so I, was drawn to a lot of those movies when I was a kid. And there were always sort of these Asian detectives who can sort of figure things out. And it was fascinating to me, as someone who learned about the Chinese Exclusion Act and the Immigration Act of 1924 late in my life, to take that racial history of America in line with these sort of Asian archetypes, and to have sort of an Asian detective who, America wouldn't even have an Asian American police officer until 1957. So to take, these Asian crime solver archetypes and actually show it atop what the actual American history was like for Asians at the time. And so that's where a lot of the genesis of the book came from. And then from there, it was about trying to tell sort of like a good noir mystery with all the twists and the turns. And the thing I love about working with genre is to have fun with the tropes, and and more than just, and not in a way that sort of you're checking things off a list, but that you're really sort of embracing what makes them fun and finding new ways to interpret them and have them speak to the themes of your story.
Yeah, one of the things that I like a lot are the ways that you're repurposing all of these classic tools and tropes of the genre, but you're reforming them in this really fresh, individualistic way that feels very much like it is 100% yours.
Thank you.
And one of the things that I appreciate is that, despite the fact that it's set in a very specific time, is that it's resonant on so many different levels, in a way that doesn't date the work. We'll be able to look back at this 50 years from now, and despite it being, at that point, God knows how old the time period will have been that it was set in. But you'll always be able to look at this and not only take the sort of specific questions that this is raising to this specific cultural context, but extrapolate it. A lot of it is about this sort of paradox of identity and the duty that these different dueling identities will sort of ask of somebody, and how a character like Ed is going to try to reconcile that.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much about that. It's funny when people talk about the timeliness of the book. Like, when I started writing it, I thought the timeliness aspect was talking about an immigration ban and talking about what it was like to grow up in the shadow of an immigration ban. And it was during the course of writing the book and doing the book, like, I've been writing it and we've been creating it sort of as there's been this rise of anti-Asian hate crimes across America. And so it got this sort of new added resonance and sort of timeliness as a result of that. But I think you're right. Like, there are aspects of the book, certainly, that is meant to sort of speak to not just the Asian American experience, but the immigrant American experience, which is to say the American experience. It is about, defining yourself as an American when you're caught between two cultures, the American culture of the world that you're living in, and the whatever immigrant culture that you take as part of your heritage. And that really, to me, is the American story. And even though this is sort of a noir, it at the end of the day, in my eyes, it really is a story about America and Americans.
Yeah, I mean, I say this as a white guy, but I think that it really does, it does have so many different cultural and identifiable appeals. I mean, like I'm a first generation American. my family comes from Portugal, and you look
Mm-hmm.
at and I even look at the way, my mother has been Americanized, and I
Mm-hmm.
think about how it's, whether it was a conscious choice or not, how some of that original cultural identity has been lost,
Yeah.
in between time. And um it's bittersweet in a
Yeah.
way, because part of you, and I'm sure you get, I mean, this is consistent with the book, but part of it is, the sort of beauty of mixing culture in
Right.
America. And I think that what makes this title so interesting, or one of the many things that does,
Mm-hmm.
is that this is before we identified the beauty of that sort of cultural interaction in America, that cross-cultural interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it coming out now as the sort of dawn of, I don't know, this sort of awareness to racial and cultural discrimination is kind of coming over the mass public, makes this book so much more accessible, because we're able to look back on this now with this very contemporary understanding of race and identity and culture, and it's part of what I think will make this book easy for pretty much anybody to kind of walk in the shoes of Edison Hark.
I hope so. I hope so. I mean, and certainly the goal is to, have an aspect of Edison that is, in my eyes, universal to what it is to sort of be an American. While on the other hand, put Edison into these really challenging spots where you feel challenged to empathize with him and sort of work with that. And again, to me, it is all about sort of the straddling between two worlds and two allegiances and two loyalties.
Yeah, what was I remember seeing something where you were talking about, whose cover was it? Mike Choi cover, about
Yeah,
the difficulty of being yellow when you're blue.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. He
and
did such a gorgeous cover on that. It was such a smart, amazing cover.
you have a murderer's row of cover artists
Yeah,
on this
I've
book.
I felt very lucky. I felt very lucky. The people who've and there's some more people that will be able to reveal. I'm also really excited. We'll have a couple artists who will be their first work in comics, and they're some of my favorite pieces. So we're on the verge of announcing sort of who those artists are going to be. So yeah, what I love about comics is working with artists. And so for me, it was the opportunity to work with all these different artists that I've never worked for before. The very easy challenge I set for myself on my variant covers is I wanted to be an artist of Asian descent that I'd never worked with before, and so primarily because, part of my challenge is I balance comics and TV work, simultaneously. And so I'm not writing as many comics as I would like to. And when you're not writing as many comics as you'd like to, I'm not working with as many different artists that I wish I would. So like anytime I can find an excuse to work with an artist I've never worked with, even if it's just a cover, I'm so elated and so excited.
Yeah, and that must be, and I'm only kind of projecting and putting myself in your
Yeah.
shoes, but that must be kind of fascinating to see all of these different, Asian talents working on these covers, and sort of trying to distill a concept in your book, or trying to distill an interpretation of what you're doing in the book down to a singular,
Yeah.
sort of eye-grabbing image.
Yeah. And I think too, it's, different people focus on different things.
Mm.
And I think especially the more you know about the artists, the more you know why they focus on what they focus on. It's hard for me to talk about this without revealing like the artists down the line, which I don't know if I'm allowed to. But like, there's one of my favorite covers. One of my favorite covers is coming down the pike. It's a very big name sort of artist, and if you know his background, you know exactly why he chose that image. And but even if you don't, like, I look at someone like the thing I love about the thing I love about the covers for the first issue is, you have someone like Dave Johnson who like is a friend I've worked with before on Unknown Soldier, but like such an honor to have him work work on my book, and to take sort of these Asian elements and put it through the Western style of design that like he embodies, like because he's such a student of sort of like pulp fiction and all that sort of stuff, and then to put it side by side to what Sana Takeda did, and if you look at like Dave's work, his is all about like the detective and the person, behind the bars, behind the barbed wire in the concentration camp on his cover. Whereas on Sana's piece, it's so much about the city and about Chinatown itself. And it does and the thing I love about those covers, which I think part of me, I was fingers crossing hoping would happen, but didn't imagine would happen to such a degree, is that you really do get a sense of the East versus West perspective on the same material. Whereas Sana coming from Japan, like it is, I can see the connections to a society that's a little bit more society based, to have so much care and attention be put on the city and to the community. Whereas, Dave coming from a more Western perspective is more about the individual, and both of those are those warring, conflicting aspects are part of the Asian American experience. And so to have those two covers represent that, and so in a way they're kind of telling a story together, which I don't think I really planned. I hoped something like that could happen, but never would have planned for that to happen. And so the fact that it can, like, I'm really grateful, and it's really exciting when I see that stuff start to come in.
Yeah, that is really profound. And what I love is in general about the storytelling here is that there's not only this sense of perspectivism, east and west, and you could go further and further. I mean, even between all of the different cultures within Asia and the creators that you have working on that, and where they're taking that sort of cultural perspective to the work, but also this connective tissue, right, that exists throughout the world, this diaspora of storytelling.
Right.
You can go and I was having a great conversation with Ram about this as well. And you look at something like Norse mythology and the sort of importance of the cycle of life and death, but there's also that sort of consistency of the impermanence of death and how it is sort of the next step, in your existence, and that's found in various Indian cultures and theologies and religions, and so I kind of wonder that when you're taking this sort of approach to the good Asian, is there a particular type of connective tissue in the storytelling, in the themes, in the world building, that you've noticed, aside from maybe the sort of specific Asian American experience of the period?
Well, I think part of the question you're asking is the question that I'm asking. So, because you're 100% right, you look at something like Latinos, and Latinos encompass a wide number of countries and wide number of cultures, but at the very least, they're all connected by language. But you look at Asian Americans, and we don't even have that, right? So then the question kind of becomes, the question that is exactly the question you're asking. It's like, well, what is the commonality in the Asian American experience? When you're asking the question, like, what are Asian American themes? And I think part of what the good Asian is asking are those questions. I think it's part of what Hark on an existential level is asking of where, what are my similarities to these white Americans, and what are my similarities to my fellow Chinese Americans, and where do I sit sort of between those two? So I think that is, for the good Asian, I think that is the ultimate question. And it's certainly the question that I sort of ask as I write it, is sort of like, when we're saying Asian American, what do we mean? And what are these things that connect us? And I think it's one of the reasons why the book lands so hard on the sort of this immigrant experience, this connection, this straddling of two worlds and trying to find your place in both. And again, that's not an Asian American thing, that's an immigrant American thing, which is to say it's an American thing. So it's all I feel like part of the conversation that the book is asking, and that I'm asking sort of in writing the book.
Yeah, and it's very present even in something as sort of forward as the title. I mean, you can take that and expound upon that to multiple different ways of identity. But despite the fact that the good Asian is sort of tongue-in-cheek, I think it does have so much thematic resonance for the book. I mean, what does that mean? How do you define it? It's hard enough when you have a very specific culture, right? But when you have something, like you said, so sort of broad and wide spanning as the sort of identity of Asian, it makes it even more sort of tumultuous. And then now you're integrating this culture of people I mean, it still exists now, but obviously more prevalent back in the period that this book is set in, is what does that mean in the context of also being an American, you
Yeah.
know, and all these things. It's so well woven together.
Thank you. Thank you. No, thanks. I really appreciate that. And you're right, and you're absolutely right to sort of pick up on that too. There is conflict in that name, and there's certainly conflict in sort of the historical legacy of the notion, because the good Asian conjures up memories of the model minority myth that Asians sort of grew up, have been asked to sort of adhere to, but or have been or put upon on Asians. But it does, you know, to say, because Asian is such a catch-all, it is so broad, to say what does it take to be a good thing of something that's so broad, there is a conflict, there is a question involved there, and even down to sort of the, to take that conflict and to boil it down and dramatize and to sort of hark to Edison Hark, the protagonist. He's a Chinese American cop, he's an Asian American cop, and he took that job because he wanted to do good, and doing good meant following the laws of the land. But what does that mean when following the laws of the land is not in the best interest to your fellow people, or people that you have a lot in common with, or your family? So that, that's a conflict that he feels on a very literal, very dramatic level, but it is sort of an existential conflict that he feels as a character, and I feels, and hopefully other people can sort of relate to.
Well, and I want to give you a compliment regarding the way you're setting up all of these different layers of conflict in the story, because they exist both internally, existentially for Edison, but also sort of externally in the way you're handling plot. I'm not going to give too much, but they're like, I mean, just off the first 3 issues that I've read, there are about four really intriguing subplots that are not only interesting for that external conflict, but because they also generate internal conflict, whether it's for Edison or a number of the other cast characters. And I'll name drop Lucy, because nobody knows and there's no context.
right.
But I think that you're putting, and we talked prior to sort of recording about how you have a background in computer science and that sort of that analytical approach to storytelling, and I think you're really putting that on display in the way you're weaving conflict, but also working the sort of right brain and left brain by making it emotionally compelling and resonant to the general themes of the book.
Well, thank you. Honestly, that's the biggest compliment I could ask for, because it is something I'm sort of I'm thinking about a lot. And one thing that I keep in mind when I'm working on this sort of stuff, because during I was a Vertigo editor for about 7 years, and during that time I worked on a lot of political books. I worked on a lot of books that that had political commentary on things that were happening in the world. And one of the things that I've learned, and it was something that I took from Mike Carey, is that it's all about where you plant. It's all about where you plant your tent, what soil you plant your tent in. And that if you plant your tent in the right soil, if you plant your tent in politically fertile soil, then every aspect of the book becomes political. And you don't have to work for an analogy. The analogy is always there. Like one of my favorite shows of all time is The West Wing. And because that those characters are in the White House, you can tell all these character stories that also has a political dimension to them as well. Just as simple, there are political allegories to everything those characters do, but it's not like you have to step in time and think like, okay, I want the character to make this political journey. They just make characters. They make character journeys, but because the world they live in is political, all those character journeys will have political statements behind them. And so I think a lot of that is sort of the approach that I bring, is that if I find the right political soil to set my tent in, and if I find the right genres that I think will make the most of that political soil, I can sort of tell these two stories at once. I can tell hopefully an emotionally engaging stories that are about characters, but also has the opportunity to talk about things bigger than just sort of the moment that the characters are at.
Yeah, there's certainly this really interesting symbiosis between the sort of contemporary perspective and playing with all of these sort of classic tropes of the crime genre. You're applying them in a way that is very fresh, and paying a lot of homage, to these incredible crime stories. I think aesthetically, obviously, just from the Western perspective of things like the Maltese Falcon, and but there's an intelligence that you're bringing to the good Asian, that comes through the tropes that might have otherwise been looked at, I think, in the crime genre as just the trope. You know, maybe it's, you know what I'm saying? It's hard to.
I think I do. I think I do. I think because, you know, we have sort of the benefit. You know, at the time they weren't tropes yet, right? They were new tools in and of themselves, and because we now have, you know, it's been almost 100 years since the books that I'm looking to for inspiration, and so you've watched a lot of different people have their own takes on those tropes and a lot their own spins on those tropes, and with all that time, with all that context, we've had the time. And also just a historical view of things, we have that time to say like, oh, these tropes actually spoke to this certain moment in history. And so with that knowledge and hindsight being 2020, we can possibly use these tropes to talk about other moments in history just by, you know, turning it 5 degrees this way or 12 degrees that way.
And kind of tying into what we were talking about before and the sort of fertile ground in which to plant your tent, but also the conversation there is reflecting back, you know, on how you've set up this story. In what ways do you think your experiences or your reading has sort of osmotically affected the way that you're approaching the story, right? Because writers are often sort of creating subconsciously as much as they are consciously. And I'm wondering, you know, looking back now, because I mean, I've read 3 issues. I got to imagine that you're 4 or 5 in, if not more by now.
Yeah, we're pretty far in.
Yeah, which I give you a lot of credit. But I'm wondering, looking back, do you think that do you acknowledge anything sort of in present day that you're experiencing or reading or engaging with that has sort of osmotically made its way through to The Good Asian?
I mean, I think everything does. Like, you know, it's kind of hard not to. It's kind of hard to sort of set up these firewalls of like, what is it? What does it? I've been a very big believer that just while I'm working and it's also sort of pragmatic because, you know, you constantly have to be working on a couple different things. You can't keep a firewall from the world and for other media to sort of influence your stuff, and you can't be afraid of that. And so the only way to stop it from overwhelming your work is just to keep to inundate yourself with as much as you can, so that hopefully all of your influences kind of work and sort of makes sort of something new. So as a result, like, you know, I can see television sort of influencing how I write the book, in the sense of I want, you know, even though it's all you know, part of a greater mystery and it's all telling one story, I do want every issue to kind of feel like its own complete chapter, its own complete, you know, episode. I wasn't necessarily watching The Crown when I started the book, but like I definitely watched it sort of at some point in there, and just watching how like, oh wow, there are certain conceits that a show like that would use within the confines of just one episode that it might not bring over to another episode. You know, I found that attractive, and so that I would definitely employ that as I went, but also too, like, you know, that was always part of my approach. Part of it, you know, comes from comics. Part of it comes from working at Vertigo, where, you know, you'd work on a book and it was always sort of that fill-in story by like the guest artist that would turn out to be the best story in the book, primarily because it had like a beginning, middle, and end all within those like 22 pages. And so that's always sort of like, you know, I'm a old school comic geek, which means that I have a ton of long boxes sort of in my apartment. And if you give me the option to have a trade collection with a spine that I can put on my bookshelf and 5 loose comics I'll put in a bag and put in a box, I'll choose the comics I put in the box, you know? And part of that is because I love that experience of reading a comic. And so when I'm writing, I'm thinking about that experience. You know, I'm thinking about, you know, to me, I'm thinking about, it's a different, as a writer, I approach it differently. If I'm trying to get you to turn a page, if the last chapter of the story is just to get you to turn a page, well, that's a different challenge than reminding you in a month that you have to go to a physical place and pick something up or tell somebody to put this sort of aside, right? So so that's the experience I'm keeping to mind of like, all right, who are the people who get me to do that? And as a result, you pace these stories a little bit differently at the end of every one of my comics, because I still remember what it was like, to be counting my pennies and being like, I only have $10 for comics this week, so like, which one am I gonna take? Because I remember that so vividly, I'm always thinking of, okay, what is it gonna take to make that $10 cut that old me used to have, because he couldn't afford that many comics
And the beautiful thing about the Good Asian is you can tell that you're very conscious of the sort of the way the comic is distributed, the way the story is going to be digested, right? Both as a 9-issue arc, right, of this narrative, but also individually in 9 parts. And what I really appreciate is, after reading 3 issues, despite the fact that each one of those issues are very conscious of their place in that narrative incrementally, they do so on a very individual level, right? Like the way issue 1 the way issue 1 forwards the sort of plot and the development of the characters is very different from the way you do so in issue 2, and very different the way you do so in issue 3, and all of them are well done. And there's something to appreciate that I can't quite put into words, where they're diverse without feeling disjointed, and they all very much contribute to one another while being great in their own right.
Thank you. That is definitely the goal. I think that's definitely the goal when I'm just writing comics in general, and it's because, like, again, that's how I read comics, and it's still how I read comics. Now I don't have the same problem of only having $10 to spend a week on comics, and I have the opposite problem where, how do I keep track of all these sort of different comics that I'm reading? And so I do want, the reader, you can't quite do that Jim Shooter thing of like every comic is someone's first, but you kind of want someone to come in as clean as possible. It's one of the reasons why, you don't see it sort of in the advanced PDFs, but it's something I started in Infidel, but it's something I'm continuing it with the Good Asian, is we do like recap pages, in the inside front cover, just to kind of, because I know what it's like to read a comic and be like, shoot, I got to go back to my boxes and like find out what happened last issue. And then you read last issue, like, oh wait, I don't remember that either. So maybe I got to go one, and then you've wasted not wasted, but you've spent an afternoon sort of like trying to catch on a comic. So like for me, I'm hoping that the experience itself invites itself to rereadings, but I'm hopefully not requiring you to reread, just to enjoy the latest issue. And as a result, and although I do hope that everyone will see there's a lot more going on if you sort of reread and sort of track everything as it goes. But I do sort of, I know what it's like to read something and be like, I don't remember what happened last issue, and trying to give you a concrete, I think some of the traps that comics can fall into is that because it's an ongoing serial, that you're constantly telling the middle of the story, and sometimes that's great, but I, again, going back to my favorite comics, being these like single one shots, I do want every individual issue to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And even if it's a beginning, middle, and end in the middle of a larger saga.
Yeah, I don't speak in moral absolutes, but I'm going to say that it is a net ethical good that you put in the what happened last issue sort of man, I never understand why, especially with like the ongoing serialized comics, why more people don't do it. Because like you said, I mean, I think first of all, there is like a net good that's being done that you're putting out into the world. But it also just makes sense when you're trying to pull in a reader base, right? Like you're always trying to expand and get new eyes on the book. And there is going to be somebody who's going to pick up issue 2. There's going to be somebody who, when issue 7 is coming out, is going to watch this and go, well, shit, where do I go?
Yeah.
Where do I start? And okay, maybe issue 7 might be difficult. They're going to have to backtrack, but they can go as far as they can, get that little bit of summary to set them up, and then I guarantee you, they get as far, they read the summary, they catch back up, and they're like, well, now I got to go back. I have to.
Right.
So
yeah, I hope so. I really do. I really, really do. And certainly, we're, this theoretical, we talk about, so as we're making a book, about this theoretical audience that discovers a book by issue 3 and reads issue 3 first and then goes back, and there's no way to quantify how big that audience kind of is, but you always are. But and I'm certainly trying towards that theoretical audience of this hope that I just heard about this book, well, maybe I can sort of read this cold. Like, it's funny, like one of the conceits that my editor did such a good job of of talking me out of, much to the chagrin of my designer, who was just like, really, we have to make one more change, is that, and I think it might actually be in the PDFs that you read, is originally I just love the idea of like harkening back to those old sort of pulps. And so we used to have like continuing page numbering in sort of for each of the individual issues.
Yeah,
but it was
about that.
Yeah, but it was, and I liked it. And I got it from Dave Lapham, who does it sort of in straight bullets, and I think it's such a cool idea. It's just meant to be a nod to like those old sort of pulp novels. But in the printed comic, we were actually going to traditional. We will still have page numbers because I like that old school kind of thing. But we actually will go to traditional page numbering, going back to sort of one. And a lot of it was because like even though people are picking up the middle story, we didn't want there to be a reminder at every page that like, oh, you're at page 40 or page 102 or a page of something else. Primarily because we were working so hard for it to be a complete experience, even though you're in the middle of a story. And the idea, and it was one of those things that my editor's like, you sure you want this? You sure you want this? And then finally it's like, no, you're right. Like, this is like, we're doing so much work to have an experience that's not part 3 of X, that or X of 9, that it's silly to like sabotage ourselves by like, reminding them every page, oh no, you're at page X of 340 or whatever it's going to be.
Yeah, no, I can certainly appreciate that level of deliberation, especially like now, getting into making comics myself. But it's something that I'm always talking to other fans and reviewers about, these very deliberate choices that the reader will never recognize, ever. But it's like, there's so many things that sort of make me think about the way a soundtrack or a score is going to affect cinema or film. Oftentimes it is blind, and if you notice too much of it, it's going to pull you out. And there's this like sweet spot of where you're doing all of these things that are not going to be conscious to the reader or the viewer's experience, but are overall going to help chaperone said experience. And that's definitely one of those things. I remember I was reading issue 3. I was like, was this an oversized number 3?
Right.
And then I went back and looked. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And despite the fact that I find that interesting, I mean, as I can say it as the peanut gallery, I guess, I think that you and Will made the good choice about, incrementalizing and starting back at page 1 in order to make it feel a little bit more inclusive, because I think that the story does also lend to that. I think somebody, first of all, if you, for some reason, you're watching this way late in time and you start on a later issue, go back to the beginning. It's very good. But also, I think somebody can pick up issue 2, kind of, get the down and dirty of it, read issue 2, and then go back, pick up issue 1, so on and so forth. You're and by making such a sort of small choices is incrementalizing the page numbers like that, I think it helps this experience become more and more immersive for a reader that might not start out at issue 1.
No, I agree with that. And I like the fact that you bring that up as well, because like that is definitely the goal. The goal is, and again, it's from my love of comics, and I want the comic to be an experience, and that's from front cover to back cover. And so it's one of the reasons why in my comics, like, there are no ads, and maybe there'll be, I'm sure at some point I'll sneak an ad to like me and Alex's previous work and all that kind of stuff. But like, there are no outside ads, primarily because I like this idea of curating an experience. And you see it a little bit in the first issue, you see it more in the second issue, where we'll include more back matter, where the goal there is that even after the story's done, to have something that provides the reader sort of with an experience, and that hopefully as we go is an interactive one. So because I know those were my favorite comics. I still remember reading Grant Morrison's letter columns in The Invisibles, or James Robinson's letter columns in Starman, or Garth Ennis or Warren Ellis or any of those guys, but just this idea that there is a sort of a community sort of behind books. The line I love quoting from Brian K. Vaughan is that, new books don't have audiences, they have families. And so I really take that to heart when I sort of making these books.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally get it. And there's something too I've noticed as I've gotten older into reading comics, like there is this almost fetishistic quality to reading a comic and opening it up, and you might see a sort of preface, or you might see back matter, cover designs. When I was first getting into reading comics, I didn't care about this stuff. I was just like, let's get to the story. And I definitely garnered a greater and greater appreciation for things like that. Like, I mean, God, you give me the script in the back of a book, that's eye porn for me.
right.
You know what I'm saying? And I like that consciousness too, that you bring with bringing a little bit of that forematter and back matter, because like you said, it's an experience that you're shepherding. I had a conversation last night with a friend of mine about expectations of comic book writers, both where they're expected too much and where they're expected not enough. And one of the things that I said was, a comic book writer is responsible for nothing more than shepherding an experience. That is it. There are sort of ethical, moral, and however many other sort of responsibilities that you hope that they adhere to. But it is an experience, and whether it's in the story directly, or it is in especially working on an indie book that is yours, the paper quality, right? How that's going to feel in hand. It's a very it's like I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase it without being hyper redundant. It's an artist's decision, more so than anything else.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like, I think, and I do think this is one of the places where Image has kind of led the way by giving their creators the freedom to do this. I think about this a lot is, it's hard to be a comic book collector and not fetishize comics. That's why we put them in the bags and the boards and all that kind of stuff. And so, I appreciate the comic collectors who take that sort of that kernel of fetishization and sort of applies it to every aspect of the book, whether it's, Jonathan Hickman seems to have sort of single-handedly brought in like design spreads and made them sort of mainstream. And so now you see them, on sort of all these books. You'll see them on the titles of the big two, and the way more and more comic book creators are bringing designers into their books, primarily to lean into the fetishization of sort of the book itself, primarily to give it all sort of a uniform identity. I think, and it's not something it's not something a Marvel and a DC or even one of the bigger companies can do, because they have so many. At the end of the day, they have so many sort of responsibilities. They have responsibilities to people that are not the reader, and so therefore, their responsibility to the experience stops at sort of a certain point. Whereas I do think for books like ours and for Image books, we can extend our responsibility from the front cover to the back cover and all the pages in between if we choose to. And I think what the thing that Image does is it gives the creator the choice on how far they want to, do everything, but also to curate that experience.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. The design work or the design of a comic and or a graphic novel is another one of those things that goes sort of blindly unspoken but huge to the experience. I mean, honestly, I don't even think it was prompted by me getting into writing and creating comics, but I started paying attention to the likes of like Tom Mueller, who was doing all the excellent stuff for X-Men at Marvel and did beautiful design for Blue and Green by Rom. It's like you said, it is very much part of the experience, and it does play a huge factor also in the sort of marketability, right? Like how is the design work going to pull a reader in that might not otherwise have picked it up? It's absolutely massive. It plays so many different multifunctional roles.
One of the things you see, and it's actually one of the things I'm excited for people who've sort of like read previews of the book to see, is that primarily because like I did my math wrong. I had more pages in the printed comic than I thought I did, which meant I had more room for design pages, and so some of the editorials there get expanded and all that sort of stuff. But as a result, I could, because when the PDFs that I think sent people were just sort of like, in a sense, the bare minimum of the story, and so while there are certainly no story pages that are added sort of in the printed comic, I think what the extra design pages and editorials and all that sort of add just gives a fuller experience. It just lets you, even though the story's the same, it lets the world breathe just a little bit more, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that, like, even something down to, you know, growing reading comics in the 90s, there's this sort of like distrust of variant covers, and you know that they're just like, did they lead to the downfall? Did they lead to the bankruptcy of Marvel at the end of the day? Like, you know, and all that. But one of the things that I've really started to embrace them, beyond the chance of getting to work with people I've never worked with before under small commitments, is that it's something my friend Jody Lehub has sort of told me, was that he loves variant covers, and part of the reason why he loves variant covers is every artist who works on your book and gives a different take on your book is expanding the world as a book. Yeah. It's providing a different vantage point of that book, of that world, and it makes the experience bigger. And I really loved, and I think he's 100% right on that. And it really did sort of give me a complete 180 on how I looked at variant covers. It's like, oh, there's actually, even though it doesn't have, they aren't narrative pages in the book, it actually does, there is an experience that it provides to the story.
Yeah, like we were talking about earlier, a little bit about that sort of diaspora, right? And how you're going to put it in different lenses between a Dave Johnson cover or a Sana Takeda cover. And I think you just made me go full 180. I'm not gonna lie, man. Going into my first book, I'm like, we're doing 2 covers.
Right.
We're not gonna flood the market. Like, this is what we're doing. And that is a brilliant point. Honestly, it does make me reconsider that. Not that I'm gonna go, 90s Marvel or 90s Image with my covers, but it's a really interesting perspective to have, that I think adds a lot of value to that conversation.
Yeah.
About I don't want to call variant covers a gimmick, but about the sort of the sort of marketing ploys of comics.
Right.
Like, it's interesting. It does have not it might have a narrative function. You look at the cover, it might change the way you are coming into the story. So I guess we could say it might have a narrative function in a way.
I mean, like, I look at, we talked about this, I can't remember if it happened before or after the podcast officially started, but like, Mike Choi did a wonderful cover for Sanctum Sanctorum comics. And to me, it is such a different perspective on the material that is so at the heart of the material that I never thought of, that my artist never thought of. And to me, that, like, really, if for anyone watching this who hasn't sort of seen it, like, go to Sanctum Sanctorum's, Instagram page or website, and it's a Mike Choi cover for The Good Asian #1. But it provides, like, just a different level of thinking than I had, and it made me relook at certain things sort of in my book, and I'm so appreciative of that, and that is a part where I think, in a way, for the artists who choose to take it, variant covers can be new voices into a conversation, that the book is engaging, and as a result, it's kind of, I think from the outside looking in, I was just like, I don't know about all these variant covers and all that, but like, having going into it, like, I do actually, there is a storytelling artistic merit to having different people kind of come in and out and speak to the aspect of the story that highlight the aspect of the story that speaks to them, so that they can, and then they can be a microphone to that for other people.
Yeah, no, it is definitely an eye-opening conversation, because I don't know, I'm very much of the type that's like, speculation, blah.
right. Yeah.
What variant covers are for, but no, that definitely kind of puts a 180 on that. And we've talked a little bit about the different cover artists that have worked on the book.
Yeah.
I want to get into a little bit about the collaborative process behind this story. So, first of all, I mean, one of the first things I complimented you on after reading the first 3 issues was the colorist, Lee Lowridge.
Yeah.
And how they are helping so well to curate the tone of not only the book and the series, but individual scenes and moments. I specifically love how unapologetic they are about it, because there are moments where you'll go from this very sort of cool set of palettes with these sort of blues and like wash greens, and then red. We're going red, oranges, and it's I think under a lesser colorist, those choices might feel a little bit shocking, but Lee very good at making a lot of nuance out of that sharp contrast.
Yeah, Lee's the best. I mean, Lee's the best. Like up until now, because I like to think my work is the best. But like up until now, Lee blew. I always knew how good Lee was, but then he blew my mind when he did Deadly Class, and that his whole approach to color there was like such an integral part, sort of, of that experience. But I've seen Lee work on so many different sort of books, and it's always amazing what he does. Because the thing I love about everyone who works on the book, whether it's Alex Tefengi, who does the art, Lee Lowridge, who does the colors, Jeff Powell, who does the lettering, everyone, their first priority is storytelling. Their first priority is, what is the page trying to communicate, and how can we move that forward? It's especially in a medium like comics, there can be cases where you're working with artists who want to hog the ball and who just want like a page that I can sell because they'll look really good, or I just want to draw this cool thing. And I've been blessed in my time writing comics to always be working with people who want to pass the ball, who are always in service of the story. And Lee's definitely one of them. Lee wants the pages to look great. He wants to treat every page like a page of an art book, but he's also looking at sort of like what the intent of the artist is and what the intent of the story is. And so I think that's one of the reasons why he's so good about adding atmosphere. He can find these color choices that just, they look simple on the face of it, and so much of it, and it's sort of in the similar way that, like, an artist like Alex Toth will be, what makes him such a great draftsman is he knows all the lines to take away, so that all you have is a pure form. Like Lee, we actually went through one pass of the colors, and we were like, I don't know if this is it, and Lee was like, you're right. And he like stepped away from it for a couple weeks, and then one day he was just like, all right, I gotta get back in this, or Pornsek's gonna fire me. And then he goes back in, and what he did was a stripped down approach from even the stripped down approach he had before, which is the approach of the book right now. And it is just sort of distilling the book in terms of what tells the story, but also like what sets the mood of the scene and really heightens. Because the truth is that Alex's art can be hard to color, and part of the reason why it's hard to color is his art is so complete in black and white. It actually doesn't need color. It does everything it needs to do without color. And I think for a lot of colorists, when they see art that complete, it freaks them out a little bit because they don't want to mess it up. But at the same time, they want to prove, some of them might want to prove that they're there. And so you can get stuff that's garish or over busy. And what's great about Lee is that he never falls into those traps. So he knows when you have art that's as complete as Alex is, he knows like, okay, this is the other thing I can do. Like, I can emphasize sort of the mood of it, and I can use these kind of like inspired color choices to kind of jolt you. I think the thing, if you've met Lee, if you hung out with Lee, he's both bold and sly simultaneously, and his color choices are similar. Like they're bold and sly simultaneously.
That, I think, that's the perfect way to describe it, because you can tell that there's a lot of deliberation there, and I think that's sort of an interesting conversation about how difficult it might be to color something like Alex's style, because it is very distinct, it's very sharp, and it's, I mean, we were kind of alluding to it, there aren't a lot of sort of mid-tones, right? In the sort of rendering of the world. It's very much, this very distinct, strong line work, and he places he spots very, very deliberate and powerful blacks. And it's striking, right? It's part of what makes his art great, but I can understand why it might make things a little bit more difficult for Lee going into it. And I think he found an excellent way to approach it, because I've found that as I've gotten into trying to understand and dissect comic book art, like you were saying, oftentimes the masters are the ones that know when to pull back. You look at the guys with these very striking, dare I say, simplistic styles, and it's easy for the onlooker to say, oh, well, that's all that they're capable of. And you'll peek in their Instagram and they'll be like, I did this hyper realistic piece. Look, I do the art thing. Just to get it out there, and you makes you think like, he could spend a week to a hyper realistic rendering, or he can do what's going to suit the storytelling best. Right. Totally. And make something not necessarily impressionistic, but make something that gives the sort of I was going to say impression, but I said it wasn't impressionistic, and therefore I would be redundant. But it makes me think a lot of the way sort of Scott McCloud contextualizes comic book art and understanding comics, which if anybody hasn't read it, you should. I don't know why you haven't. And it's very present, you know, in Alex's work. And speaking about your collaboration with Alex, and knowing that you have a background in television and film, and you spend a lot of time, you know, assumedly writing spec scripts that have a lot of visual detail, I'm wondering how that plays into your collaboration with Alex, and really how much of how much do you have your hand in the sort of cookie jar visual direction in this book?
I you know, the way I like to look at all my books, and it's why I like working on comics, is I do look at the scripts as sort of a conversation. And it's a continual conversation, which is that my scripts have a bunch of ideas on how a page should look, but it's also, you know, the first thing I say is, feel free. This is a grab bag for you to pick from. You know, don't feel boxed in by this. If I'm giving you visual inspiration, it's meant to be just that, inspiration. They're not directions, it's inspiration. And so part of what I do is I try to put as much inspiration on the page as I can. Part of that too is also to help to free them up, to have fun. I try to provide as much reference as I can, with the knowledge of, Alex, you're going to stylize this the way you're going to stylize this because it's going to go through your lens. But if you need it, here's reference to what these things look like at the time. And I look at like my, you know, panel descriptions similarly. Like, you're going to style this to however you style this, but if you need some inspiration, you know, here's the way I was looking at it that made me feel like this will all fit on a page, and sort of take it from there. And so, and it is a constant sort of back, and that's honestly what I love about comics. It's a constant back and forth. My favorite parts, my favorite pages, and I get so much joy when it happens, is when he sends a layout that's different than how I described it on the page, you know. And we have that back and forth of, this is awesome. Most of the time it just ends there because his instincts are so good. I'm just like, this is awesome, go with it. Sometimes, occasionally, maybe I can foresee a situation where it's just like, I love all this, just make sure this one aspect that's important to me for the story is communicated. You know, I don't know if we've actually had that conversation because Alex's instincts are so good, but like, that is in theory what would happen.
That's the beautiful thing about comics, that ebb and flow, because it creates something that is far superior to the sum of its parts. It's a beautiful thing, and I love sort of talking about that collaboration because it's something that I don't think a lot of readers get insight to, right? You truly don't know, for the most part, what the contributions are singularly, right, from the writer to the artist to the inker, because one you know, you could ask something of the inker, the colorist, Alex could ask something of you or the colorist. It's this sort of a symbiotic relationship, and it's powerful because, you know, like we were saying before, it just fortifies the overall artistic vision of the product. And I love that how it plays off in The Good Asian, because despite the fact that I'm definitely one of those proponents about, you know, of how comic books are so individualistic, you can also pull in a lot of cinematic techniques into comics, as in the same way that you can pull in concepts from poetry or prose or what have you. And you read The Good Asian, and it's so inherently comic booky, but there's a cinema to it that I can appreciate visually. In particular, just to kind of tease everybody, on the last page of issue 1, there is this little aspect to aspect sequence of visuals, as Edison Hark is faced with the most dramatic moment of the issue, right, as we get to the close, and I look at this and I was just like, oh, he made me anxious, like this, he's doing the thing. And there are a lot of small things like that in this book where your relationship with Alex and with Lee just bleeds out onto the page and creates that experience, you know, that you're going for. And I gotta give full compliments to that, because that symbiosis in comics is not always identified.
Yeah, well, you know, and I think part of it too, part of it honestly is the reason why I work in comics, the reason why I love working in comics is that because I worked in comics as an editor for 7 years, and then on the TV side for like 4.5. But I worked for DC Comics for like 12 years, and part of what I love about comics is the excuse to talk to old friends, and the chance to meet new ones. And that's one of the even going down to like how I handle my covers. I've got covers from people I've never met before, and covers with someone I've known for over a decade. And it's because that's what I love about comics. And so as a result, and I think Lee was the first person who kind of used the analogy for me, but it's Lord knows it's an analogy everyone uses. Right. Comic book creators, or when you're making a book, you're a band, right? And you're a band, and you're all trying to synthesize a sound. And so that helps if it's more fun where you've got a bunch of people that you've known for a while, that you have the same jokes with, that you can kind of do it, but you're throwing in some new blood in there as well. It keeps it fresh, it keeps it alive. And that is sort of like, I met Alex on this book, but Will, is one of my best friends in comics. Will Dennis, my editor, is one of my best friends in comics. Jeff Powell, I worked with on my last book, who's the letterer and the designer and production artist. Lee Lowridge, my first professional drinks out was with Lee Lowridge. Dave Johnson, I've known him over a decade. And so, and again, primarily because there's so many old friends here. That was one of the reasons to bring new voices into the variant covers. But that's the aspect I love about working with comics. And I do think that experience, that mixture of people you're comfortable with people kind of providing fresh voices, gives you a distinct sound that hopefully you're finding sort of on the page as you're reading it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's consistent with this idea, and it's not a one-for-one sort of allegorical translation, but I've always said that comics are the jazz of literature.
I agree.
You get all these sounds that might otherwise be dissonance, but in sequence and context, it creates something that is entirely unique and individual to the people. And I find that very, very sort of consistent with what you're saying there.
No, and again, it's one of the things I just love about comics. I wouldn't be making comics if I didn't love making comics, and I wouldn't love making comics if I didn't love the people in comics. And I think it's all part of sort of embracing all of that.
It is one of the things as like the sort of fledgling comic book writer that I always look forward to the most is talking to a new person, talking to a new artist, a new collaborator, and seeing how they're going to take what's in my head and make it ours, right? Instead of just mine. Because I'm sure you can relate that as the writer, you get kind of bored when it's just in your head and it's only yours. And there's a longevity, right, that the artist and the rest of the art team can provide to your idea, because then it becomes, quote unquote, ours, right? The whole
right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I had a very specific question about here's a cool little offhand question I have for you. Do you listen to music while you're writing?
I don't. I can't, because I will get too easily distracted. Especially if it's a first draft, I need every energy I can get to put words on that page, because a blank page terrifies me. And then once the words are on the page and I'm editing, I need that concentration to just sort of like figure out what's working and what's not working. So I'm not. I wish I was, though, but I'm not, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I always find it interesting because you get so many different responses.
Yeah, you do.
A lot of people have playlists depending on what they're writing. Because I was going to ask if you were going to recommend a song or an album to read The Good Asian to, what would it be?
Oh God, I'm horrible at those things. I am not musically literate enough to sort of do that. I think probably, and I think the other people who have a playlist are probably just smarter and more efficient than I am, is that like one of the things I do when I'm working on something is I just like soak myself up in the subject matter. So that's not just like the history books for The Good Asian, but it was like all like the Continental Ops, Sam Spade, Philip Marlowe, Easy Rollins, Lou Archer. Like I'm constantly reading that stuff. I'm constantly, reading a crime comic, on my stack of comics to read. All the crime comics instantly jump to the top. Like I love doing sort of all that. I have a feeling the comic creators who are working off music are much more efficient than I am, and it's probably why they can write like 4 books a month and I write like one like every couple years, which I'm
Yeah.
really trying to change. But yeah.
No, I get it. I mean, everybody's going to have a totally different approach creatively, and what they like to surround themselves with, it's all different. I know, like Brian Hill is someone that I like to talk to quite often, and he's very much interested in the applying a sort of music, while he's creating, and I wish
I knew music. I think I would be a better TV writer if I knew more about music, if I had broader musical tastes.
I wouldn't cut yourself short, man. You do well, more than well.
Thank you.
No problem. I do want to briefly kind of talk about your upcoming short story in the Festival of Heroes, but sort of kind of giving like a little closure on the good Asian conversation. I want to implore everybody who's watching this, and to tell them, their friends, their freaking mothers, go check this book out. It's really solid. Anybody that watches my channel knows that I can be very sort of what's the word, dissective, when it comes to talking about stuff or making recommendations. And we were talking a little bit earlier about making recommendations when you don't know someone's taste. But I think that despite that, this story has a lot of appeal to a lot of different people, despite the fact that it is very specific in where it's set and the sort of specificity of what lens we're looking at it through. It is multi-textual in that sort of application, and it plays with genre, it subverts genre, recontextualizes it, and it is very poignant and very striking when it comes to the sort of political conversation that you're generating. But one of the things that I think makes it so great for as a white guy reading about the sort of Asian experience is that you're not pointing fingers, you're generating a conversation, right? And sometimes fingers need to be pointed, but what I love is that you're not isolating anybody away from this text, and I think that that's part of what makes the best art that is also sort of commentary so appealing. That's why Do the Right Thing, right, is pretty much on everybody's top 20 list. Because Spike ends the book with this really kind of morally ambiguous ending, and then decides in the credits to both have quotes from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, and he's not telling you how to think. And that's one of the things that I love about The Good Asian, is you're not telling somebody how to think, you're providing an experience, and you're letting the reader interpret what you have to say, and sort of make that understanding entirely theirs. So the highest compliments to you.
Thank you. I really do appreciate that. I really appreciate you noticing that as well, because it is, that conversation is sort of important for me. That's what the book is. The book, I see it as, I don't know how to write any other way. It is a conversation that I see that is happening. So and I hope it's interactive.
It is 100%, and that's why, like I said, it's this, despite my sort of my dislike of not making general recommendations, I think that this is something that anybody can access from any walk of life and find a way to engage with a part of the narrative connective tissue, whether it is specifically theirs or not. It's a great book.
Thank you.
Just honestly, from every angle, colors, art, the prose of it, and also I want to give a compliment, because I went back and started reading Infidel as well.
Oh, okay.
And I think your approach to dialogue in comics, despite being great in Infidel, has expanded.
Oh, thank you.
In a really great way in this book. There's an economy, I think, of the dialogue in being descriptive and being a sort of expository while also hinting at character.
Thank you.
And the cadence of it,
it's
very authentic. And why I think that is one of the greatest compliments I can give is because, despite the fact that you're using a language that is indicative of where the story takes place and the time, it's not dated by the language. It feels sensible to a contemporary reader. So, yeah, man, you've done a bang up job on this book, and I recommend it to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. The dialogue, especially the dialogue for this book, is something I thought about. A lot of thought was given to that. A lot of thought was given to the exact aspect you're talking about, is how do you do the era justice while not letting it overwhelm, sometimes the 1930s patois can kind of almost turn into self-parody. And so how do you do that in a way that you acknowledge that people, just acknowledge that truth of the time without, making it seem like a parody of itself. So thank you. I really do appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you for giving us that work. Something, just kind of prefacing briefly the Festival of Heroes, something I'm kind of noticing, whether it's just me looking too far into it, is this advent of, I would say, like a modern Asian invasion of comics, in the same way that we had the British invasion, which was honestly probably my favorite era of comics ever.
Yeah, it was a great era.
A lot of really talented Asian voices, both writers, artists, so on and so forth, that are coming and bringing this very particular vision of comics. And I want to give DC a pat on the back, because I think bringing that into something like the Festival of Heroes and kind of further acknowledging that is doing another sort of net good, because there's this both broadness and connective tissue between all of these different Asian creators coming forward, because like you said, Asian is such a broad term. We've talked about, I've given a lot of praise to Ram and how he brings that Indian perspective to his storytelling and so on and so forth, and you're bringing your perspective, and it's this really beautiful experience, I think, especially as a Western reader, right? I'm so used to this Western perspective, and I love sort of being enlightened by that lens,
Yeah, no, I first of all credit to DC, in terms of the book, but just there are, like you say, that it does sort of feel like there's so many great Asian and Asian American creators sort of working in comics right now, from Gene Yang to Mariko Tamaki to Greg Pak to Ram, there's so many, Amy Chu, there's so many sort of great creators out there, and when you look at that anthology especially, you realize like, wow, DC's done a great job of giving all these people work and nurturing their voices and helping them sort of find things, and that's kind of amazing. And then when you look at just sort of when you start getting into this sort of variant cover game and you start looking at all the artists, there's the amazing amount of Asian and Asian American artists, or Asian artists of Asian descent. There's so many great ones sort of out there that it is an embarrassment of riches. And so, it is sort of it is and I do think things like social media and Instagram sort of make the world sort of smaller. One of the artists I found purely through Instagram. So I did that thing I'd never done before of contacting someone through Instagram and just seeing if they'd be interested. It is an absolutely amazing time.
Yeah, and so I'm curious, because I haven't looked into. I certainly plan on picking up Festival of Heroes, because there are many names that you mentioned that are involved with the project, including yourself. So I wanted to get a little bit about what you will be featuring in your short story in the Festival of Heroes.
Yeah. So for me, it's me and Alex, so the Good Asian team, and we're doing sort of a Ryan Choi story. In keeping with the Atom, it is a short story for a short hero, so for a tiny hero. So it's a sort of a 4-page story. But Jessica Chan, who put it together, had it was such a great thing to sort of be a part of. And once again, I'm working with I know his name. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. Aditya
Bidikar.
Yes, Bidikar. Yes. I love his work, and he's lettering it. So that was a fantastic chance. Romula starts with a B, and I can see his name, but I don't know how to pronounce it. But he's coloring it, and he's a colorist I never worked for. So again, it is doing this thing that I love of just working with new people while working with friends, kind kind of thing. And yeah, but I'm so grateful for Jessica for giving me the opportunity to sort of do that and sort of playing with that. And it is sort of meant to be sort of a character story about Ryan Choi, but also to talk about sort of, as it advertises on the tin, to be a celebration of aspects of the Asian experience.
Yeah, the thing that I love about anthology stories is that under the hands of a good writer, they know that you have no time for plot. There's no point in trying to squeeze it in there. But what you can do is have a really enlightening experience with character, and talk and sort of play around with that. And I love just kind of honestly hearing you say that off the bat and about how it is sort of about his experience. But I'm wondering, despite the fact that it is a sort of short 4 pages, we've come to understand, how much of yourself you're putting into Good Asian, but I'm wondering sort of what part of Pornsak is going into this little Ryan Choi story.
I think when you read this story, it'll be really obvious what part of me. If anything, that the story sort of builds up to the part of me that and I at this point, for good or for bad, I haven't done enough comics work. I'm not spread out enough in my comics work to do stories that I don't feel some kind of personal connection to, that there isn't some kind of personal itch I'm trying to scratch, whether it's about the character or about what the story is talking about. It's about sort of finding that thing to me that says like, oh, I have to tell this story. I just did a short story for DC's anthology Love is a Battlefield, and that was an interesting one for me because it was an 8-page short story, and the assignment, they actually came to me to sort of write a Sergeant Rock Valentine's Day story. And so and it came at a time where I had a lot on my plate, and I thought like, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I have the time. And I always, whenever that happens, I always give myself 24 hours before replying no. And then within those 24 hours, I found a story that I realized, oh, I really think I need to tell the story. Like, I really feel something will be I will be the one who misses out if I don't tell this particular story I have in mind. And so I took the job. I love Chris Moneyham did the art, and he does a fantastic job. The art really channeling his cube art influences. I got the best compliment in the world where #1 Sergeant Rock fan Tom King likes the story and tweeted about how much he liked the story. So and also my editor Will Dennis, who I slipped the story to, who was Joe Kubert's editor for 2 volumes of Sergeant Rock, like loves the story. So but that was a thing of just like, oh, I have to tell this story. And I try to get myself to that with any story I take on, that it's a story I feel like I have to tell, that I feel like I will be missing on an opportunity to say something about something if I don't tell the story.
I think that's the truest and purest sign of a storyteller, when it doesn't become a story that they want to tell and it's something that they have to tell. I don't like to call it a dialogue because it becomes impressionistic, but for the sake of having something, we'll call it an impressionistic dialogue, an expression, if you will. And sort of having that interaction, with readers is, I don't know, it's a transformative experience. And it's something that I think low-key writers need to have, storytellers, I guess I should say. And it's in a way almost like you're getting people to pay for your therapy.
It's true. It's very, very true.
That's awesome. I definitely look forward to checking out the Festival of Heroes. I think DC has a really great body of interesting Asian characters with great perspectives and backgrounds. I mean, I've been screaming into a void for a little Cassandra Cain story for so. So
I think she's got a story in there. So
so it's very exciting, and I look forward to reading your short story in there as well. Kind of as we begin to wind down, I have some kind of out there questions that I like to ask. One of which is, what is your cocktail or hard beverage of choice?
I am not a big drinker, so it is infamous that I will when everyone else is drinking, I will have a Coke. Occasionally, I will be as bold as to have a rum and Coke.
Fair, okay, nothing wrong with that. It's a classic for a reason.
Yeah, exactly.
What is one question you have always wanted to been asked in an interview?
That's a good question. I don't know. I have no idea. I have no idea. I don't know if I'm not a big window shopper, so like I'm very much I take what I get. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's one of those things where, you know, you go through it, and I've had, you know, my handful of interviews when promoting books, and the one thing I'm always like, huh, that was like a question I didn't know I've always wanted to have been asked.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. The questions the great questions are the ones that surprise you, that you've never sort of been asked before. Most of the time it's just, you know, some aspect of the book that you didn't think about. It forces you to think about some aspect of the book. So I don't. So yeah. So I guess I think that might be why I have a hard time answering that question. My favorite questions, the questions I want to be asked, are the off the beat questions.
Okay. Speaking of off the beat questions.
Okay.
If you had to pick one person in comics history to sit down and have a dinner with, who would it be and why?
Oh God.
Dead or alive?
Oh, I don't know. Oh, it's tough. I was so jealous that Brian Azzarello got to hang out with Frank Miller, like on a regular basis. That sounds amazing. Or just to be like a fly in the wall when that happened, like just sounds like amazing. I would have loved, I think, to sat down with Archie Goodwin. You know, he's such a respected writer and editor that, and you know, he passed before I entered comics. I would love to just, you know, he's had such a profound effect on people whose work I love. But I don't know anything about him as an individual. I think. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a really great answer, and I think it's just not it might not be one of the most typical answers. You know, you'll get the Frank Millers and the
right.
And Grant.
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, and obviously those three. I mean, who wouldn't want to have dinner?
Yeah. Seriously.
But yeah, no, that's awesome, man. It has been an absolute pleasure to sit down and talk with you.
Same here. I really enjoyed this, so thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I love the sort of care and the intelligence that you've clearly read the book with, and you've brought to sort of the interview. So this was a great time for me too.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, first of all, like I said, it's bittersweet that I've read the first 3 issues, because I've had such a good time reading them, and now I'm like, well, now I have to wait 3 months.
Yeah, I know. It's so true.
But I will be waiting with bated breath, and I will look forward to rereading the first 3 issues in time for issue 4. And I implore everybody to go check this book out.
And to that point, like, even though you've read the PDFs, I do want to say, with the printed, there is an effort to sort of make it a different experience when you're sort of reading it with the design material and extra content. So hopefully, you know, it won't be quite the same as getting a whole brand new 32 pages, you know, but hopefully there will be a little bit of a new experience when you're reading the comic, in a non-PDF form.
Oh, you don't get me wrong. As soon as I read the first issue about a month ago, I think prior to that, before I even reached out to sit down and have this discussion with you, I reached out to my retailer. I was like, "You're getting the Good Asian, right?" I was like, he's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Good, I'll take 3." Like,
that's awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
On that, I want to give a copy away to somebody that might not be able to otherwise read it. So we'll talk about it, and I'll refer everybody to follow us on Twitter. And I'll for when people watch this, the links will be in the description below. But there's going to be a little banner rolling across the screen where people can come follow us. We'll talk about it, and I'll figure out a way. But I want to make sure that this book gets eyes on it and perhaps gets into somebody's hands that might not have otherwise checked it out. So
I really appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. So make sure you follow Pornsak and myself on Twitter, and we'll be coming up with some sort of way for somebody to win a copy. But in closing, first of all, I want to say thank you for the conversation. Thank you for being such a thoughtful and considerate creator in the way that you tell your stories. I think it adds so much into the world, and as thankful as you are for the readers that pick it up, we are thankful for the storytellers that are sharing this part of themselves and this part of their outlook. You know,
thank you. I really do appreciate that. It's
thoroughly appreciated. Thank you. And do you have any closing thoughts for the people at home that will push them towards experiencing this wonderful book?
Honestly, I just hope, you know, the goal is to tell a story a familiar story that you've hopefully never seen before. So I would like to think that if you're interested in crime stuff, you'll want to give it a shot. If you're interested in Asian American stuff, you'll want to give it a shot. But you're interested in stories about like America and how like we use genres to tell stories about America, I hope you give it a shot. If you're a fan of like comics, I like to think that we play around enough with like the comics form that we're providing some new things to sort of entertain you. But yeah, that's my big thing. It's just like, the first issue comes on sale May 5th in your comic book stores. I'd love it for you to give us a try and tell us what you think.
Absolutely do that, and I will make this blanket statement with pride and say, if you like good stories, just go go do it.
Yeah.
But I want to thank everybody for watching this, getting to the end of this video. If you enjoy it, obviously make sure to leave a like so that we know this is the type of content you enjoy. Subscribe to the channel for more shenanigans like this. Pornsak, I look forward to at some point hopefully having you on again
Yes,
as the Good Asian comes to a close, and I can actually kind of let all of the explicit thoughts out about this.
Right.
But man, it's been a pleasure. So they can find you on Twitter at real_Pornsak. Instagram, same tag.
Yes. At real_Psac on Instagram.
All right. And do you have a newsletter or anything that the folks at home should check out?
No, I probably should do that. I was just. It's so fun. I need to jump on that bandwagon. I keep telling myself I don't put out enough stuff to put a newsletter, and then people who do less than me put out newsletters. So maybe I'm just lazy, and I just need to get over that.
Yeah, it's an advent, man. It's not something that you going into it, you're like, yeah, this is going to be really beneficial to me, like building my sort of readership and my family. Right. But then you realize that like every big name, has a newsletter. So
I know
it's surprising, but
yeah,
despite that,
yeah.
but I want to thank everybody for watching. This has been an awesome conversation, and make sure you guys pick up The Good Asian next week, May 5th and onward, from Image.